was called Dakota Midday, and then we expanded it to 2 hours when Owen DeYoung retired, and now it's called In the Moment. Is that enough, Lawrence, for
I think that
how
brings
we
us.
got here?
I think that brings us current,
Mm-hmm.
and thank you for that, because I think, when you hear someone on the air, it's easy to hear them as a shell, you know, and that shell never represents really who they are. And knowing a little bit about a person really fills in a lot, and it actually helps the interview. It's like when
Mm.
you're listening to the other person and listening to their reaction. At least for me, it give that person being interviewed a lot more depth than if I didn't know anything about the host. But but there isn't always the opportunity for that. So today we're going to be talking about food, and you and I have talked a little bit about food and some of the ideas that we're going to be talking about today. But can you tell us a little bit about a couple of the books that have inspired you to look at food in a different way, some way other than just the taste and nutrition?
Mm. I have a couple books today to actually read some excerpts from, but some of the books I don't have with me are actually the writings of MFK Fisher, who was a great traditional food writer. And when I freelanced for the Argus Leader, my editor, Jacqueline Polfey, introduced me to her because we had to do some food writing, and I had just never done that before. And MFK Fisher is just a genius food writer. I highly recommend her essays if you've never read anything of hers. And then today, this is a book called We Gather Together. It just came out in 2020, and it is about the history of Thanksgiving. And we interviewed the author earlier this year in November. And we'll get to it here in a minute, but it's just a wonderful and obnoxious, I don't know what's the word, abundant description of a Thanksgiving table that was written in the 1800s, which I think is a really fascinating look at how we got some of the expectations for holiday meals that perhaps we function under today, at least in my family growing up, we did. And then I think everybody here probably knows Wendell Berry. And I have an essay collection of his called What Are People For? And he really writes about agriculture and the history of food, and especially from South Dakota. It's an interesting conversation about, where these things come from. And many of the things that were at my table growing up were completely disconnected from any farm to table experience. They're very, whatever you would find in Better Homes and Gardens magazine in the 1950s. And those are the traditions that were passed down to us. And these days, rethinking some of those things in the way that we get food to our table. Just a few titles. We could go on.
Yeah. There's so many books about food, and they do together. They really give us a whole different idea about what eating is about, because sometimes we think about it just in terms of caloric content and what it tastes like, and sometimes its origins, but its connecting value is, I think, often overlooked, even though we're always practicing it. So maybe you can choose something to give us a flavor of We Gather.
Sure. So We Gather Together is about a woman named Sarah Josepha Hale. And it is pre-Civil War, right around the time of the Civil War in America. And she is really trying hard to campaign for a national day of Thanksgiving and gratitude, because it doesn't exist at this point. George Washington issued a national day of prayer. Thomas Jefferson refused because he didn't think that that was appropriate for government to be involved in telling people what to do with religion. James Madison was accused of being influenced too much by the Presbyterian Church and having one church take over the country. So up until this point, there really isn't what we would recognize as this day in November is our National Day of Prayer. So Sarah Josepha Hale is a writer. She's an editor. She has a ladies magazine, essentially. And she's kind of she doesn't mean to be the Martha Stewart of her day. She's more political than that. But some of the things that she writes are based on what you would kind of consider familiar today in some of those kinds of magazines. So this is 1827, and she's writing about the table. And first she goes off on the table itself and how she's pulled two tables together and covered them with this beautiful cloth, which of course, how many of us have done. And that is so wonderful for a man to be at the head of a table with as many people at his table as possible. And then she talks about the food. And she says, the roasted turkey took precedence on this occasion, being placed at the head of the table, and well did it become its lordly station, sending forth the rich odor of its savory stuffing and finely covered with the frost of the basting. At the foot of the board, a sirloin of beef, flanked on either side by a leg of pork and loin of mutton, seemed placed as a bastion to defend innumerable bowls of gravy and plates of vegetables disposed in that quarter. A goose and pair of ducklings occupied side stations on the table, the middle being graced, as it always is on such occasions, by that rich burgomaster of the provisions called a chicken pie. And she goes on to relish trays and desserts and side dishes and just keep this 1827. And I mean, the amount of meat, for one thing, is on that table. But I think of all the times that we have seen and been expected to be able to produce a meal that feeds so many people in such abundance. The tradition of that is really being pushed on us and celebrated as a Yankee. She calls it a Yankee Thanksgiving tradition from the 1800s. And when I read that, I just kind of laughed out loud, because she didn't consider herself a food writer. It's a lovely piece of food writing, but it's a cultural expectation that I think for many people is stuck with us for this long.
It's interesting how some of those early writings, even if they didn't get wide distributions, kind of set the stage in some kind of ripple effect for what we call culture. And we've long forgotten, if we ever knew, what the origin was, but it just kind of seeped in. And then that's what we do now, especially as you were talking about, reading all the different things that they had. And you just think too, how much work that would have taken. It's not like you could just go down to the supermarket and say, hey, throw me one of those turkeys. You had to raise the turkey, you had to pluck the turkey, you had to render it, and all of those things, plus all of the stuff you had to do. And it wasn't like you had a gas range with a timer on it. It's like you had to actually watch that turkey. The work in that. As you were reading that, I was just imagining all of the work that involved to get that on the table. She's
widowed as well. And she works to support herself and her children with some help from her son. But she works as a magazine editor. She's a full-time job. And she's a single mother. And that is the dinner that she somehow puts on the table for this family. Yeah.
It's amazing. I don't know. It's amazing. I kind of flash back sometimes on even my early food history, like as a kid. And even then, it wasn't that hard. You know what I mean? And we had an army, of kids to help prepare that. Everybody had a thing to do. One did the cornbread, and one did the help with the stuffings, and one did all kinds of things. But the preparation could go on for days, for that meal. Yeah.
I also like that she describes earlier in that writing that the children are all around the table. Like that is important for her. And I grew up with a kids' table where the kids were separated from the adults, because of the size of the house mostly.
Mm.
But I'm not so sure it wasn't also to isolate, some of that. But to her, it was really important for the head of the household to
Yes,
see all the kids that were there and be honored in that way, which I also found fascinating.
yes, yes.
Mm.
And that tradition of bringing family together. Now, I only heard as much as you read. That's as much as
Mhm.
I know about the book. Is there any other discussion about extended family in those times?
Mostly this book is about her job and her quest for a national day of Thanksgiving. So there's more politics in here than food. That was more of an excerpt of, but she did have several children who were married. So I'm assuming I've read too many books since November to remember exactly what's in the rest.
They do kind of merge.
I don't know. So, but I suspect, yes, there was an extended family there. Yeah. That's
Yeah,
my memory anyway.
interesting. Now, and you had one other piece. Could you share that with us before we get further into our discussion?
Sure. I think most everybody in this room probably knows who Wendell Berry is. Um,
It was
and
Chuck Berry's brother,
exactly, yeah.
right?
And this essay from the essay collection, What Are People For? This essay is called The Pleasures of Eating. I don't remember where he's from, though, Wendell Berry. Kentucky? I think he's from Kentucky. This is not a South Dakota story, but um, I begin with the proposition that eating is an agricultural act. Eating ends the annual drama of the food economy that begins with planting and birth. Most eaters, however, are no longer aware that this is true. They think of food as an agricultural product, perhaps, but they don't think of themselves as participants in agriculture. They think of themselves as consumers. If they think beyond that, they recognize they are passive consumers. They buy what they want or what they have been persuaded to want, and within the limits of what they can get. They pay, mostly without protest, what they are charged, and they mostly ignore certain critical questions about the quality and cost of what they are sold. How fresh is it? How pure or clean is it? How free of dangerous chemicals? How far was it transported? And what did transportation add to the cost? How much did manufacturing or packaging or advertising add to the cost? When the food product has been manufactured or processed or pre-cooked, how has that affected its quality or price or nutritional value? Most urban shoppers will tell you that food is produced on farms, but most of them do not know what farms or what kind of farms or where the farms are or what knowledge or skills are involved in farming. They apparently have little doubt that farms will continue to produce, but they do not know how or over what obstacles. For them, food is pretty much an abstract idea, sometimes something they don't know or imagine until it appears on the grocery shelf or the table.
Mm, very poignant. It brings to mind a conversation that I had with my nephew many years ago when he was I think he was just starting school, like first or second grade or something like that. And he had come to visit me. And so I took him to the grocery store, for a little shopping trip, because we were going to cook together. And so I asked him, what do you want? And he said, oh, how about a pork chop? You know? And so I said, do you know where pork comes from? And he looked quizzical for a moment and he looked up and he said, porcupines? So that's as close as he could get. It's like, how would I know? He had never seen a pig before, and he had not made the connection at that point. But hopefully he started making connections after that, because I realized then that we had a lot of explaining to do in the grocery store. So
Well, yeah.
go ahead, you were going to say something.
Well, this year, I think for so many of us, I know for me, um, I live in the city of Sioux Falls. I live 4 blocks away from a grocery store. The best restaurants in the state well, that's not true because there's some really good restaurants across the state. But this town has some really great restaurants that are easy and convenient to stop. I work downtown. You can stop and get dinner on the way home. So I was living a life of food convenience and supporting local businesses. Almost all those restaurants that I went to were local. And often they were doing the hard job of sourcing things for me in responsible ways. But when I came home to work in March and had to figure out how to feed myself and my family and grocery shop for an extended period of time, like, when we lived in the country, you wouldn't run to the grocery store if you ran out of milk. You have to plan. When you live in a city, if you're out of milk, you can just go you can send your daughter to the store, and it's so easy. I had to rethink everything about where that food was coming from. And when Smithfield shut down, I'm not a huge bacon, ham eater, but just the awareness that all of a sudden some of the things that we thought were certain were no longer certain in our communities and around the world. I think it made a lot of people rethink where that food comes from. And for me, I had to learn how to cook, which I've really done well. I'm really proud of that. I've turned into quite a fine cook in my house. But I had to start from scratch. I was like, I don't remember how to do this. I haven't done it in so long. So it was a year for that, I think, for a lot of people to really rethink how our processing is set up in South Dakota, how our agriculture functions in South Dakota in ways that perhaps city dwellers don't consider nearly as much as we should.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that connection broadly from most of our lives to the farm and also to food sources, not only the farm, but the processing. I think that is something that's we miss as individuals exploring as well.
And I think we didn't have money growing up, and we ate things like what my mother called poor man's soup, which was tomato soup with like elbow macaroni in it. But I was never hungry. And I've never spent a life being hungry. But I have had times in my life where food is just totally utilitarian. The Marine Corps, for example. We could talk about food in the Marine Corps for a long time, being cut off from it and not being able to get it. But this is the first time, I think, for a lot of people that they had to rethink where their food was coming from. And if you lost your job this year, how were you going to get that food? If I lost my job, it wouldn't be very long before I would not be able to afford to feed my family. And that's chilling, I think, for a lot of people. And a lot of people suffered this year.
And that has been a very big awakening to a lot of people who never lacked the privilege of being able to buy and eat whatever they want. Another angle of that is even if you have the money, there could be a situation where there is no food and the money becomes worthless because even though you have the money, you can't eat it,
Right.
So that's a thing that I think that some people, we haven't gotten to that point yet, at least in South Dakota that I know of, where there's no food on the shelf. But we did go through a period where things started to disappear from the shelf because the supply line was broken until people sort of righted themselves. So at least for me, having lived in countries where that was the case, where it didn't matter if you had money, the stuff wasn't there. That was an eye awakening. Let's say a special moment, to realize that food could get that way too, even though it wasn't so bad. It was always a substitute,
Right.
Let's talk a little bit about the family connection now, because I think that's a very family, and I'm going to throw in friends with that as well. Because this time of the year, as is Thanksgiving, we use food for more than gluttony, in the case of, like having all those different kinds of meats and stuff like that. But even though it's there's something special about bringing all those people together and sharing abundance. Would you care to share some thoughts on that?
When I was growing up, we would go to my grandmother's house, and she lived in Fairmont, Minnesota, which is about 2 hours away from where I live today and lived then. And that abundance is about halfway between the Minneapolis family and the Sioux Falls family. So everybody would come to Fairmont, and the food was always the same. Everybody had their favorites, and there was a great abundance. You know, we celebrate Christmas and Thanksgiving and Easter, and we were together, and the 4th of July. We'd be together for those, and each holiday had its own food traditions. And you couldn't leave anything off, you know, because one person liked rutabaga, I think. No, what is the jicama?
Oh, jicama, yeah.
Jicama, yeah. One person likes jicama, one person likes yams, one person likes Christmas pudding. And then we had this corn casserole recipe, which is a tradition and legendary in my family that my grandmother made. And every year there's 4 kids in my family, and we were just obsessed with the corn casserole. When she died, I got the pan that she made the corn casserole in and started bringing, that was my responsibility to bring that pan with the, you know, I had the recipe, everything in it. And one of the things I think is so interesting is we've tried to, you know, we moved Christmas to my dad's, you know, he's gone now. We've had Christmases apart. We moved Christmas to my brother's for a couple of years. He died this year. The corn casseroles always come with. The last 2 or 3 years, it just has not tasted the same. And I keep thinking, I made it for Thanksgiving, and I was like, it's just kind of bland. I think I messed up this recipe. And my brother, I had delivered some to his house this Thanksgiving, and I told him, I was like, I think I got it wrong. And he said, yeah, I didn't want to say anything, but I don't think that was 100% there. So I looked at the recipe. I've got my grandmother's original, you know, in her handwriting, all her recipe cards have little golf clubs on them because she was a really awesome golfer. And I looked at this recipe, and it's the exact same. I did not copy it wrong. I'm not making it wrong. It's bland, but we remember it because we were all together. And I think we all had this, the food tasted better because we were together. And now that we're celebrating these little apart kind of Christmases and trying to figure out what's next, all of a sudden some of the magic is gone. And so I said to my brother, I'm gonna tweak the recipe this year for Christmas. I got some ideas on how to spice this thing up yet, so we can still have it. But the real thing is it was always about the people. It was not about corn casserole, which I think everybody has some kind of corn dish. Everybody I know has some kind of corn dish on their holiday table around here. And but it's not really, like you said, it's not really about the food, and it really never was.
Yeah,
it's about us. Yeah,
it is about us. And how does the food, do you think, how does the food connect us?
It was my grandmother and my aunt who prepared. It was the women in my family who prepared most of the food. And I learned, I didn't like cooking. When I grew up, I didn't cook. Still not a great cook. But I learned in my teenage years, I think, that if I wanted a relationship with the women in my household, that I probably should show up in the kitchen because that's where they were having conversations. And so when you went in there, all of a sudden, you were in this different world, and all the action was happening in the kitchen. And that's when I became someone who wanted to be in the kitchen, because the wisdom and the stories and the love, they weren't withholding it from anybody. It was not a gender barrier. Anybody was welcome. It just so happened that those women liked to cook. And so for me, it wasn't the eating at the table isn't the best part. Being in the kitchen with my grandmother and my aunt, my daughter. When I was married, my husband, you know, we're divorced now, but he was with us, being in the kitchen with him. Anybody who I love being in the kitchen with me, making food was the special part. And I snack while I cook, so I'm not hungry by the time we get on the table anyway. I'm like done then. I just get to watch.
You know, it's interesting that you mentioned that connection, because I can remember I must have been 25 before I knew that men didn't cook. You know, I just never knew that because I didn't know any men that didn't cook. My father was a cook in the house and out of the house. He cooked all over. Firemen in our neighborhood, they even had like cooking contests. All of the macho men knew how to cook. I just didn't know that men didn't cook until I read it in a newspaper article. So in our household, I don't know that there was this thing where that must have been quite different. I'm reflecting on that as you mentioned that there was a whole.
It was a small kitchen, and my grandfather had Parkinson's disease. So I don't know if he cooked before. I never knew him to be very mobile. So he would be sitting in the dining room. There wasn't a lot of room. And my parents, my mom and dad, did cook. But when we gathered for the holiday season, there was a very tiny galley kitchen, only so much room for people in there.
Yeah.
But she had 2 ovens. Imagine that. And one of the ovens was in the basement, and it was a double oven. Mm-hmm. So you have no problems with room at that point. But there was no refrigeration. So you'd make things the night before, and then you'd put them outside to keep them cold, and then fit them in the ovens in the morning. So
now that's a very interesting footnote, but one that I think is relevant here as we talk about food and its relation to our relationships is the refrigerator, and how the refrigerator impacted our connectedness, and Jell-O. And are you familiar with that story?
No, someone's else going to have to take on the Jell-O part of this conversation. Jell-O is not one of our family traditions, but I'm told it's a very important thing. So I will step back while other people talk Jell-O.
Jell-O is the thing, but I never knew Jell-O like I learned it in South Dakota. It's because people do things here with Jell-O that defy the imagination. It's like Jell-O. I mean, it's just amazing. But then when I learned why Jell-O was such an important thing, that became even more interesting. And it was because when refrigerators were introduced to replace the icebox, Jell-O became the way that people can say, I have a refrigerator without bragging, because you couldn't make Jell-O in an icebox. It wouldn't happen. You had to have a refrigerator. But if you sort of went out saying, hey, we have a refrigerator, it just kind of almost ostracized you as some kind of uppity Easterner or something, But you could make Jell-O and then just bring your Jell-O casserole, and that just said very subtly that you had it. But then it just got to be all kinds of things. The first time I ever had tuna in Jell-O was in South Dakota. I never knew that was a thing. And it was well received. Whereas if I had been any place but South Dakota, I would have looked on that with horror, like, but it just seemed to fit.
Jell-O is a Lutheran thing too. I had Jell-O at every Lutheran potluck my whole life. I can't imagine Lutheran potluck without red Jell-O or something in it. It was just a given.
Yes. And I was used to Jell-O being sweet, but then I realized, no, it doesn't have to be sweet. It can be anything, So
I'd like to throw in my little Jell-O story. I moved away from South Dakota for, 20 years or so, lived out in Washington in the Yakima Valley. And then we moved back here and to a small town, which I will let remain nameless in this story. And everyone in that area was touting this particular cafe 20 miles away on Sundays and their buffet. You've got to go. And so we did. And it was one of those deals where they greeted us at the door, very small place, and welcomed us and explained that the meal of the day was pork chops. And you could have a plate with one pork chop and the salad bar for this amount. And then for a couple of dollars more, you could have the 2 pork chop plate. And they said, so go ahead and go to the salad bar and have your salad. We were really anticipating that because we used to eat out at these huge steakhouse salad bars when we were in Yakima, where you had all manner of greenery and vegetables that were fresh and crisp. The only thing green on their salad bar was the Jell-O. But the pork chops were wonderful, and mashed potatoes and the corn.
Green is for sheep. We don't do that. Well, great. So,
is anybody making Jell-O today? I mean, who makes it still? Okay, because I don't want to get myself in trouble by saying that I don't do Jell-O, but I do Jell-O.
I can tell you, I actually have grown an appreciation for Jell-O. I don't that I didn't have before. Because seeing all the things that people were doing with Jell-O, other than just putting fruit cocktail in it, because that's pretty much what we did. It's like just make a whole bunch of fruit cocktail, put drain some of the water, or use it in to make the Jell-O, and put it back, and hope that you got the cherry, but other than that, my Jell-O repertoire wasn't that big. But now I've grown an appreciation for, like, okay, well, maybe I was culturally deprived about this Jell-O. There might be some other angle to it, and so now I do other things with Jell-O, but I'm not making any for Christmas.
Yeah.
But I'd like to extend this conversation now, or direct it toward how food connects us, especially in times of celebration.
Well, I will start because I had this thought whilst Lori was talking about the families coming together and at the table and all the conversation. And my family at times was sort of spread apart, and we only saw each other sometimes at these big dinners. And there seems to be, I don't know if it's cultural or if it's just human nature, but there's this sort of thing where your conversation can be very convivial and welcoming, but it also can be rather superficial. And but when we come together with all these familiar dishes that you have to have because it's Jane's favorite dish or something, you don't have to hesitate to talk. There's all kinds of conversation. There are the family jokes that come out about the time that one slid out of the oven and landed on the floor or something like that. And so it gets the conversation moving, and you may never get around to what I like to think now is, the nuts and bolts of life, but that just wasn't done much in our family. You didn't talk about things really personal and insightful and that sort of thing. So that's one way I think the food brings us together, is we sit down together and then the conversation goes on and on. I remember too, when I moved away, and going out west was very liberating for me. The culture was at least 20 years ahead, the popular stuff, liberation of women, for one thing, I felt was already well on its way. And I remember coming back to visit and realized I did not want to go sit with the women in the kitchen and talk about babies and recipes. I wanted to be in on a more expansive conversation. And I felt like a renegade because I kind of moved through this big archway door and sat where the men were, because they were talking about all kinds of things that I wanted to hear. And I think I broke the ice because we don't do that thing anymore, at least not our generation. We don't separate ourselves. The men in my family have always cooked, and more so since their children are grown and gone. So if we're going to talk recipes, everybody wants to hear about how'd you do that? That roast was great or something. So it's changing things. It's still really good. It's better.
Mhm. Anyone else on how the family uh, traditions are made, or how your practices or what you ate, how that bound you or connected you with family and friends? Nobody's connected?
I can say a
We
couple of
could,
things, I guess. I grew up in Indiana. Um, my family originally from the 1800s was in Eastern Kentucky, so they brought a lot of those traditions with them. One of them being that every Christmas morning, Grandma would bake a young coon, and that was the delicacy meal for us. Was a baked young coon every Christmas morning, and it was really greasy and nasty. And we ate a lot of rabbit too, and it tasted kind of the same. And I never did enjoy that, but that was one of our most interesting traditions, I guess. Back to the Jello, we did use Jello, but it wasn't in the gelatin form. Mom would make the dish with, and you may know this, with cottage cheese, and you put the pack of the Jello in it with mandarin oranges and I think chopped pecans. That's how we ate our Jello. But I think the memories and the triggers of smell, aromas, taste, um, that's really connected to our psyche, and we can taste something and it gives us a flashback memory, good or bad. And my memory is really driven by smell and taste. So that's something I can really appreciate. When I smell something or taste something, I can picture myself at grandma's house or at my mom's house. You know, it's just great memories.
yeah.
Yeah, I just want to share the baked young coon and the Jello cottage cheese.
Well, I really like that. I really like that coon story, and I can tell you, God bless your grandma and that coon, because she knew to get a young coon. Old
Yep.
coons are even worse.
Oh, another thing was we had two types of dressing. We had oyster dressing and regular dressing. I'm like, we're in Indiana. Why are we having oyster dressing? And I never did find out the answer to that. But we always had.
Yeah, those are interesting things too. When you get these, uh, somebody comes in with a dish that you've never heard of in a traditional meal, or something that just seems kind of out of place. And speaking of out of place, um, dressings made with anything other than cornbread was a thing out of place in my house. It was like, it's like, what is this stuff and why is it sticking to the roof of your mouth? So I didn't, we never grew an appreciation for that. But you could do bread pudding with it, but not dressings. So anyone else, any food stories or connection stories that people have with their families or friends?
My family, I remember we had a kitchen, and I mean, my mom told me I was pregnant in the kitchen. Things happen in the kitchen, okay? So, um, and the one thing that I can remember was the kids were in there, and then I got to be a teenager, and I could sit at the big people table. I was gobsmacked. There was different stuff, but the one thing that I remember is the gravy. My mom allowed me, and I mean allowed me, to cut up the gizzards. And my thing was, okay, this, mine, mine, this. She came in and she had that look, and it was, now you can't get what you have eaten back out. So I had to try and figure out how I was going to get around it, not just smile. You know, it's like the president, Ma. I had to do that taste testing, and I had to have a little bit more for me to make sure you were safe. She gave me that look like, yeah, right, okay. But yes, food and the memories and the tasting and all the rest of that, and getting around all the problems. The only time that there weren't problems was in the summer months where you had, the, what's that holiday? Memorial Day. And then you had some other things that were in the summer. But when it was winter, it was almost like when everybody got there, it didn't matter if they were 4 or 5 blocks away. They get there and you're like, oh, so good to see you, because there was either a blizzard, there was black ice, or there was whatever. So people got there and they got their stuff all off and they got their little apple cider or their eggnog with stuff. And it was all good. It was a fun time. But there's so many, just like Ross is saying, there's so many things that are connected with that. I drink apple cider or you know, the hot apple cider, and then I put the little thing in there, cinnamon stick, yep, and then I stir it around, and I think, oh my gosh, as I'm stirring slowly, I done really got old. But yeah, food is wonderful, and I can relate to what you're saying, Lori, about people not knowing, or what you said too, but the not knowing where food came from. Kids did not know where milk came from. It came when I was in school, 3rd grade, it came out of this great big silver thing that you put the great big white things in there and had that little thing look like an udder. And then you closed it back up and you went like this and poured it, came back down. Another cup went like this, poured it, came back down. That's all people knew about the cow. The milk that came out of there. They didn't know it had 4 feet or hooves. Yeah. Yeah, food, family, it's a good thing. And it's really nice to see so many people here too. And may I introduce my husband down there? That's my cutie patootie. That's why when I'm doing like this, that's why. So I just want to let you know I am normal still today, but he's here and he's cute and it's really kind of cool. And that's family. And maybe I can get him to talk about his cooking. Clarine knows about his cooking. Oh yeah. Sometimes he gets in that kitchen and I go to turn in. You know that the gift or meme where the little boy comes, that little blonde boy comes running and he's running and gets to the edge of the thing and then looks and goes and then turns around and runs away. That's me, because I get chased out because he's so good. But yeah, it is good to see everybody.
Yeah. Others, some food stories that connect you and your family.
I'll turn mine on. Oh, there you go.
Are we good now? Yeah?
Yes.
It's not necessarily a food story. It's a story how I came acquainted with American culture. As I thought I knew it.
The 1 bean coffee, I know you.
As I thought I knew it, you know, because as a kid growing up in Europe, you hear a lot of shit about America, mainly about cowboys and stuff like that. So even about coffee, I had my prerequisites, you know, the American coffee. There must be something, you know. I was here on visit the first time, and we were traveling, and a place advertised itself several miles away, 75 miles to go for the best coffee of the Midwest. I think, well, okay, Midwest, that's where the cowboys live. This is real cowboy coffee, you know. The stuff you can float a horseshoe on. That's what I remember from my youth, from America. Coffee, strong. I think that must be good coffee. Let's go there. It's about time. I have a little hole in my stomach. It needs to be filled. So we endured those 75 miles and signs passed, you know, the best coffee is now 50 miles away, etc., etc. Finally, we end up there. Almost missed the place because it was a gas station. All right. Nevertheless, we circled around and got in. And an old lady comes towards us with a big, how you call it, a goblet filled with some amber-colored liquid. All kind of stuff floating on it, but you could see herself upside down in the same goblet, you know. That's how clear that was. And she said, do you want a helping of coffee? I said, I'm sorry, ma'am, I think you're carrying the tea. But I would appreciate the coffee. And then she pours it in, and it was terrible. So I took a donut with it to have at least some gravity pulling it down. And we went on our ways again in the hope for better coffee somewhere else later. And then I had my inclination. The coffee must be a very difficult product to get, just like it once was in Germany, you know, because they made a difference between coffee made out of beans or coffee made out of anything else. There could be acorns, it could be chicorée or whatever. That was the normal coffee we knew. The bean coffee was something special. I think, well, that's probably the same up here. And most likely every year they purchase their coffee. They make a festival around it with floats and Miss Coffee and everything, you know, and then they introduce a new coffee bean. It dangles in the string, on a string in that goblet what I saw the lady in upside down, you know, and they use the bean for a whole year. That must have been it. Otherwise, I could not give an explanation for that kind of coffee. You know, and people were completely serious about it. It was coffee. And I thought it was something else. It was something else. It was my first memory and encounter really with what is considered to be the American cuisine, you know, which I encountered later in other fashions with limp green beans boiled into a certain depth, or corn on everything, you know. And I was knowledgeable of corn, you know, in Europe. But usually that's the stuff that comes up after a wild night when you had a little bit too much of something what is not edible necessarily. And then you wonder, why is there always carrots and corn in that? Even when you don't eat them. That's one of the miracles of life. But here people actually eat it, so I probably produced something what somebody else ate. Nevertheless, American cuisine had to take its way to charm me. And in some places, you can find the best things, what I found out as a cook. The best meals usually are very simple things, like what they call here navy beans, with little snippets of meat fried into it and then sweetened up with syrup or brown sugar. Especially when it has been smoked meat of some sort. That's very nice food. It's not necessarily mean, but there you go. It's simple, it's good. Sauerkraut is good. It's not a recipe of anything. You just heat it up. And you know, when you have a very well prepared hamburger, on occasion you'll find those. That's nice. I like that stuff. But it's not something you eat every time, you know. So the jury is still not out between me and American cuisine. Or the so, are we doing a special meal? No, it's just like my normal philosophy is every day is a holiday. So I treat this holiday differently than any other day. Sometimes the meal is copious, sometimes the meal isn't, but it's always edible. So, and this is my bombshell for today. And I will listen to all your other stories. I will turn my mic now off because otherwise the sound will keep going around. And
but this is,
thank you.
That's a very interesting story and a very good insight as to how people from outside of the culture kind of see our food and how they relate to it based on what they were used to eating. And it reminds me of a story that we were, I was hosting an Ethiopian refugee, and it was about Thanksgiving time, and I had my nieces, nephews, sisters, we all over to my house. And so in talking to him about, what was going on for Thanksgiving, I asked him if there was any food that really surprised him or anything that we ate that really surprised him. And he said, I didn't know that Americans ate dog. I said, ate dog? We don't eat dog. He said, of course you eat dog. I said, no, man, we don't eat dog. He said, I saw it in the grocery store. And I said, what? So the next time I went to the grocery store, I said, well, show me where you saw this, that Americans eat dogs. And so he took me over to Alpo, and there was this picture of the dog on the can that said dog food, so he just interpreted that's what was in the can was dog, because it was a dog picture on the can. So it's amazing how people will interact with not just our food, but our food culture, how much we pay attention to, the food that we eat, we even feed to our animals, our pets,
Mm-hmm.
Other food stories that people have or interactions with food and family.
I think it's worth mentioning that some of my favorite holidays are actually holidays where I couldn't have the traditional family meal. And I'm not going to embarrass Ross totally, but one of the best holiday meals I ever had was at Denny's when I was 18, stuck, not able to go home for Christmas with Ross and Travis. And we called Denny's and said, are you open on a holiday? And they said, we're open every day. Mm-hmm. And that's where we went. And I remember being stuck in Japan for Christmas all by myself and in a room in the barracks because we were traveling to the Philippines during the Gulf War. They couldn't get a flight to the Philippines, so 3 of us got stuck there. And I had this barracks room, and they had one book in it, and it was like this paperback copy of Bill Cosby's fatherhood book or something. So I read Bill Cosby on Christmas Eve. And then we were with the staff sergeant who took us to the staff NCO club, and they wouldn't let us in, and because we were not, we were enlisted, and he argued until we got in, and we had steak dinner. And so sometimes you're not with your family, you're not with, and this year is like that, we're not with the people, for many of us aren't with all the people that we want to be with. And some of those memories are some of my favorite holiday meal memories, where you had some ridiculous food with unexpected people who turned out to be your favorite people in the world. Mm-hmm. And this year is one of those years where sometimes you have to let the tradition go to find out what's waiting for it in its place.
And there are some special moments, like you were saying, there are special moments if you let them happen, mm-hmm. And be in that moment. Speaking of in the moment, if you're in that moment, then you can find maybe not a new tradition, but something that's pretty darn close, to that special moment that you found something special, especially if it's, how to say, if you can't be with the one you love the one you're with, Mm-hmm. So it's one of those love the one you're with moments. That's the person you're with right now, and you can enjoy that moment with them.
And all the pressure's gone then too. I mean, how much pressure do we carry on some of these holidays to make yes. it, which is why I read that first excerpt, to make it this extravagant thing. Sometimes we just, we make it less fun because we're trying way too hard and making it more complicated.
And Jane, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Jane was in New York City for college last year during Thanksgiving, and she and her friend came up from Princeton, and they went to the Macy's Day Parade last year. And she sent me a video when the South Dakota float came by. And Jane's not, and she likes South Dakota, but she's, she was ready to go to New York City for college, right? She's ready to leave.
That's your daughter?
My daughter, yeah. Mm-hmm. And that float came by and she was filming it. And the two of them start screaming about the South Dakota float in the video. And they're like, that's us. That's us. And they keep saying that's us. And then like, you know, she starts crying. And it's like, you know, you can be far away from home having this really great experience. And then she just saw something. I sent it to Jim Hagan with the tourism department. I'm like, you got to see this, because here we are in the middle of a street in New York. And she had this little taste of home, of saying, that's where I'm from. We always come home to these places too, even in our hearts. So,
and those help make these holidays and the food. It helps give stories to those, and those collective stories and collected stories are the things that create our history, and starts to create those bonds between us, because they're not just the food, but the food plays into the experiences that we have, and the histories and the stories that we share in those times. Because those are, you know, if you're going to be with someone for Thanksgiving dinner or Christmas dinner, you don't usually show up for 30 minutes and then leave. It's usually you show up, they say, oh, you know, anytime, but we're going to eat at 12. So if you're not there before that, and then people stay around, at least in our tradition, they stay around and then you eat dinner after that. So you eat 2 meals, and in some cases, 3 meals, you know, or more, you know, or just never stop eating, you know. So those create some very special moments. Do any of you in your traditions, do you play like games with each other? Because for most people, they can run out of things to say in about a half an hour.
In my family, I'm an only child. We would go to my mother's family on Christmas Eve. We lived in Minneapolis, and my mother's family also lived in Minneapolis. But on Christmas Day, we would go to my father's family, which is his brother, and he lived in this foreign country named St. Paul. So I connect many things to those adventures. St. Paul was mostly, and I found out they still are alive and well, they had a movie camera. And they took movies. Now I'm 71. So we're talking early, 50s, middle 50s and 60s. So they had a movie camera, and I remember that they took us, because we would look this year's film. So she said she has them, my cousin. So I'm thinking about experiencing that. The only comment she said was, Clarine, you never did sit down. So, but anyway, just a couple of things is that in my Uncle Bob on Christmas Day, his wife Lorraine and they had 2 daughters, made plum pudding. And you make it in a can, a vegetable can, and I never got over my fear of a pressure cooker. I don't have one to this day, because I always had an expectation that thing was going to explode and kill us all. And I don't know why. You could not explain that away from me, even today, because it would be and I would think, oh my God, we better get out of the house. We're all going to die. And then they'd take and come and give us a slice of plum pudding. And I was surprised every year that we made it, But just a couple of things to add to this St. Paul experience was that was the one time that my father honestly responded to my mother's leaning towards messing with him when he was driving. Oh, Paul, here comes a car. and it would be 2 blocks down. Or she would say, and scare everybody in the car. And there was nothing. I mean, you could, and he just, on one Christmas, we were coming home and he just pulled the car over and he says, Pearl, one more word and you're going in the trunk. And I was in the back seat going, oh, it's about time. But there was another time that do you mind? It's one of my roommates. Anyways, in 1969, I gave birth to a child, and her father was Black. And the first time that I came to the family gathering, well, maybe not the first time, but she was at this point 3 years old. So, and we go over to Uncle Bob's and we're down there. Well, my daughter goes through the whole house and starts shutting off lights. And my Aunt Lorraine, these were very conservative people. I saw them as very staunch and conservative and upper class and this and that and the other thing, right? And my Aunt Lorraine is following her. Well, Naomi, what are you doing? She said, well, I'm shutting off all these lights. And it's a little voice, I'm shutting off all these lights. She said, well, I want to know why you're doing it. And she said, well, because when we have the birthday cake and blow out the candles, it's better when the lights are out. And my Aunt Lorraine says, birthday cake? What the heck are you talking about? It's Christmas. She said, yeah. And my aunt looked at my daughter and said, well, whose birthday do you think it is? And my daughter put her hands on it. You know whose birthday it is? She was just mad. She said, this is Jesus' birthday and we're having a... Oh. So everybody in the family was duly chastised by my 3-year-old. It was just, I just sat there going, I think I'm in for a really interesting life. But what, now just one more little ingredient is that the family we went over to was my mother's sister's house. And she had 3 boys and a girl, and the girl and I are close in age and became really close for many years. Her husband, Harold, my aunt's husband, my uncle Harold, was this interesting guy. And one year he learned the word crud. And so
what was that word again,
Clara?
Clara?
That crud. This crud is just not important. I don't want to talk about that crud. And I was mesmerized because I had never heard an adult use slang before. So that was really shocking to me. But anyway, so for that and other reasons, I thought of my mother's side of the family as really hip and out there, right? And my father's side of the family as real conservative and upper class. My cousins from the conservative family are way left politically. And I got my cousin that I love dearly is almost so far right, she's almost falling over. So just, and I formed all these opinions on Christmas for, like we're talking 20 Christmases. So anyway, but my father comes from the conservative people. He was a wild, and my mother was very stoic Norwegian. So, but anyway, it's just interesting to see how people turn out when you know them kind of distantly for many years.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. These are really great stories. We're at 11:41. One of the things I would like to do is to invite people to share recipes we've shared some good stories. If you have any recipes that you would like to share, either in the chat so that people can, you can cut and paste them or something in the chat so that people can maybe try them, or just tell us a recipe. That would be interesting, I think, to see if we can do a recipe share in this time. Anybody? Any cooks in here? Besides Lori and I?
My family always had herring salad, which sounds really gross. My dad was from Germany, and we always had this herring salad, and it was probably gross. But when you grow up eating it, that's what you like. And I got the recipe from my mom, and so many things that add to taste. So it's like, what's it supposed to taste like at this point? Because there was something that you made, and it tasted best about 3 days later. So it's like how add salt to taste. It's like, what's it supposed to taste like at this point? And it is kind of gross ingredient. It's herring, apples, and potatoes, like potato salad, but with herring in it. But I loved it. And I made it once for my ex-husband, so that's probably why he's my ex-husband. I made it for that family, and no one even tasted it except me. I ate a big helping.
More for you.
I loved it. Yeah.
Is it pickled herring, Deb?
Yeah.
Oh, I would love it.
Mhm. Yeah, me too.
There was a smoke. I grew up from like Iowa, and there was a buffet there that had herring on their buffet, and that was one of my favorite places to go because they had herring. I think most people think herring is pretty gross.
Well, you know, speaking of things that are that may seem gross, I can remember when I first came to California, and we came by train, and my mother was saying to us, seems like almost every hour, now we're going to be, when we first get there, we're going to be staying with your aunt, my sister, and you know, they're poor, so it's important not to waste food, you know, and not to, you know, like be respectful of people's, you know, food and stuff like that. And so when we got there, sweet potato pie is a central thing. You can have all other kind of desserts in our tradition, but sweet potato pie, if you didn't have that, it's kind of like if you don't have meat in South Dakota on the table when you have food, you know. So anyway, so we got there, and we had this wonderful meal, and at the end, we had pumpkin pie. Now we're coming from Texas, and they had pumpkin pie, and my first thought was, these people really are poor. They can't even afford potatoes. They have to eat pumpkin pie. You know? So it's, you know, those are, it took me years. And even today, it's hard for me to like look at a pumpkin pie with sort of, you know, like, and give it a shot, you know, okay, I'll eat it. But it's just like, why? Why would you make pumpkin pie when you could make potato pie?
Yeah. My son, who is 35 now and lives in Spearfish, Bruce Coffee, went to coffee school for a week in Portland a year or two ago, and was at some restaurant, and they had potato salad. So he ordered it because he thought I like potato salad. It came with a lettuce salad with potato slice on. He said it was the grossest thing he's ever seen. And that's funny because you come from here and you think potato salad. Okay, I know what that is. And it wasn't even close.
Okay. Okay, I have a story I have to tell. I've been trying to just hold off, but when I was in high school, we had a foreign exchange student, and he was from Portugal, and he was staying with a different family, and for some reason they went away during the holidays and they couldn't take him. That's so weird. But anyway, he came to live with my family for about a month. And so everybody was really excited because Nuno was going to be there. And so neighbors brought over, you know, trays of all the Christmas stuff and all the goodies. So we had rosettes and lefse and krimkaka and all this stuff. And he loved it. Of course, he's a teenager, but he got to the krimkaka and he just looked absolutely repulsed. Like, no, he wouldn't eat it. And we're like, come on, it's so good. It's krimkaka. Everybody, you know, you like the lefse, you know, you've got to love this. He's like, caca? What we didn't know is what caca meant in Portuguese was poop. So.
That recipe, I mean, that food has a very big public relations problem.
It does. But it was awful fun to have Nuno that Christmas, and it's a good memory. And he ate everything in the house except the krimkaka.
Yeah, that does not sort of invite you into eating. Anyone else has any? Barb has actually put in our chat, in case you didn't notice, she's put in a recipe. Barb, can you tell us a little bit about this recipe?
Well, I knew Lori was looking for some Jell-O recipe.
I'm going to make this.
Jell-O, Lori. But it's sort of a new favorite of mine, and that's going to be my Christmas dessert.
I took a picture. I'm going to make that.
I hope I got everything on there. Okay.
It's doubly important because it also has Cool Whip.
Yes, that's right. That's another thing that was really new to me, is to put Cool Whip on Jell-O. You know, I'd had it. I think we had it a couple of times, like on hot chocolate, but Jell-O, no. That was a whole new experience for me. Yeah.
Do you put anything on the sweet potato pie? Because you would put Cool Whip on pumpkin pie in my family. I've never had sweet potato pie, so does it get Cool Whip?
Oh, you don't need Cool Whip on,
okay.
on sweet potato pie.
Okay.
You know, because the sweet potato pie, it is like, it's a meal in itself. You know, I mean, if it's made like we made it. Also, you don't make thin. You know how they have that deep dish and shallow dish pies? Mm-hmm. You don't make sweet potato pie in the shallow dish.
Okay.
That's like you're cheating at poker. You know? You have to have a deep dish, and there is no room. There's no room for it, and no reason for it. You know, you put topping on pies like lemon meringue pies,
right?
And things like that. But no, we didn't put no Cool Whip, and not in my house. You know, I'm not saying I never saw it, but those are places where we didn't eat. You know?
There is so much cheese in my refrigerator right now. Cheese and sour cream and butter. When you do the shopping list and you realize what is on that table, maybe it's time to rethink some of those. A shocking amount of butter and croutons for some reason in the breakfast egg bake. So
yeah. Do you use croutons in your in your egg bake?
Yes.
Interesting.
Yes.
But
I haven't.
these are
I haven't.
I assume these are croutons that don't have herbs and spices in it, or not?
No, they're seasoned croutons
Oh, really?
with sausage and cheese,
Okay.
mustard, eggs, milk. I haven't made this one in a while, but this was the Christmas morning brunch, also on the original recipe card with a golf club on it. So golfing was important to my grandmother.
Good, good. Any other recipes? Any other unique things or traditional things? Food comments? Cranberry sauce, does that ring a bell? Is that
Sure.
How many ways have you found any traditional cranberry sauce? I'll say that I didn't know about making cranberry sauce until, I don't know, maybe 15 or 20 years ago. When I grew up, we didn't make, not that no one did, but in our house, we didn't make cranberry sauce. We bought it in a can. It was jellied, and that's what cranberry sauce was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it didn't have whole berries in it either. It was just jelly.
Jellied.
Exactly.
Shaped like the can. It's got a shape like the can. Yeah.
Exactly.
If you want to. Yeah.
That's right. And you could eat a whole bunch of that. But once I learned how to make, you could eat your own whole can with that and dressings. Did you ever have like a sandwich made with dressings, cranberry sauce, and that's it? Just put those two things in between bread, and that was a sandwich. Yes, that was a thing. We might be related, Thea. Any other unique?
I found out this year that when you buy the cranberries whole, you boil them in water in order to cook them. Well, a friend of mine boils hers in orange juice.
Yes.
I've never heard that.
Yeah.
I thought that was interesting.
Be good. I want to tell you about mincemeat pie in my family. We come from a kind of British, Scottish, now I know, tradition, and that was the thing. And I've always loved it. Usually in my childhood, it was one of those little dried cartons you could buy off the shelf, and then you somehow hydrated it and stuff. And then later on, some of us got a little adventuresome and we started making it from scratch, like maybe from the old Fanny Farmer or something like that. And I just love it now. And I have to have a piece left over to have for breakfast the next morning. I haven't made any now for a few years. I've been thinking about it. But one time my folks lived on a little gentleman's farm, you might say, about 10, 15 miles north of Aberdeen after I had moved away, and they were kind of edging toward retirement. And my dad decided he was going to take on the chore of making a big batch of mincemeat. And it was wintertime, of course. And so he had to drive to Aberdeen to get all of his supplies. And they lived down a hill coming back from Aberdeen. You had to go down this hill right into their yard. And if it was slippery, you'd slide down there. And the Elm River was right there too. So you kind of had to watch where you were going. Anyway, he went off and he came home with all of these groceries, got the truck or van or whatever he had parked in the garage, and got out and gathered. And he's telling us about this later. He got all of the stuff and it was a little slippery underfoot, and he's headed toward the door of the house. This was a separate garage. They had a dog named Clipper. She was out there welcoming him home. And he kind of slipped, and the bottle of brandy flew out of the bag and landed on the sidewalk. And he said, before I could get down there and lick it up, the damn dog got to it all. That was his explanation for no brandy in the mincemeat.
For years, I made mincemeat for gifts for people. But I had a recipe for meatless mincemeat. And I think that the recipe substituted all that meat with Jack Daniels. It was a marvelous.
I've heard that's a good substitute.
Oh, honey. It's much better for you as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
You feel so much better.
The cholesterol is zilch if you don't put the meat in. I've made it, Jack Daniels aside, I have made it with meat and without, and I just love it.
Well,
they will have to do it.
Well, we're getting ready to wrap up. Lori, are there any other tidbits that you would like to share with us relative to, food and family?
I think we have covered it. I love these stories so much, and how quickly those stories come out when you talk about food. And I can't remember now who, it was Clarine who talked about politics, and these gatherings that we have are also the times where we get to talk, and like Betty said, beyond the surface to get to a more deeper conversation. And that's sort of what we do on the show. And that's what I would encourage everyone to do in their holiday gatherings, is just spend that time listening. I had an uncle who was a World War II veteran. He's a colonel in the Army, and every dinner conversation you would have that was political, he would just sort of gently take the other side. Like, I didn't know he was doing it until I was much older, and he did it as he was mischievous, a little bit. He was trying to get you riled up. But being in conversation with him over the years at holiday gatherings helped me learn how to think more deeply about things that I thought I understood from a different perspective. And we never had an argument about politics at a single family gathering at my grandmother's house. And people came from all different walks of life. And it's because we listened to each other. And that's what it's all about. So, and then if you run out of things to say, you just keep eating.
Exactly. There's always something else to do with your mouth. Just
go back in the kitchen and just hide. Yeah. But I hope it's good for everybody. I hope you have deep, meaningful conversations and good food and good connections. And thanks for being here on Christmas Eve. It's neat. It's been nice. Thank you.
And thank you, Lori. Yeah, and thank you, Lori, for joining us. And as Betty said, hope you'll join us again.
I would love to.
Yes, this is so important. And as we are talking and going forward in life to have more conversations, I think it's really important to be good listeners. And I often comment that we have many public speaking classes, but no public listening classes. And maybe that's something that's more important. And I think it's also important to learn how to bring new ideas to people. And food can be one of those ways. If we introduce something like just a new recipe or something a little bit different, it's a subtle way to shift people into not being threatened by something new, and even if they are threatened, it gives them an opportunity to try something that's a little less threatening, but it's new. And that's really important for us to do it a little bit at a time, learn to have better threat assessment capabilities, and if we can do that through our conversations, if we can introduce new ideas or different ideas to people, whether it's with our meals or just in general, that's a good thing. And I would say one last thing about food. When we eat together, it's known to release oxytocins. Just the act of eating together. That's why historically people come together around food and drink, because in that time when we bond, it allows us to get together even when we disagree with each other. The food has a way of, in a way, kind of like tricking our brain. So it's a kind of a brainwashing to be able to have the oxytocin flow, be with each other, and that's enough. And if we feel good about people, we're much more open to hearing their ideas. Thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll see you next week. Ryan, can you say something about what our program is for next week?
Yeah, I'm excited about next week. It's a friend of mine from my songwriting group here in Sioux Falls, Janice Gilbert. She's going to talk about the art of songwriting and how to craft songs that move people. So should be a good one. We're kind of doing a semi-holiday gathering again, but it seems that people are enjoying that. So we will do it again on New Year's Eve and have a glass of champagne if you want, if 10:30 is not too early for you.
Some people, it never stopped. Okay, as Jan was saying before, every day is a holiday, man. So
Right.
We'll see you guys next week, same station, same time, same station. Love you. Bye.
Thanks.
Merry Christmas.
Happy holidays.
Okay, bye.